Stop scrolling. This affects you, even if you don't think it does. A unanimous Supreme Court decision, all 9 justices agreed, has already changed how the United States works. Quietly. No headlines screaming, no public outrage. But people are already feeling it, in their jobs, their property, their rights, and their money. And the craziest part? Most Americans have no idea it even happened. The Supreme Court of the United States doesn't hand down unanimous decisions very often. When all 9 justices, Democrats, Republicans, liberals, conservatives, all agree on something, that's not just a legal moment, that's a seismic moment. That means the case was so clear, so significant, so undeniable in its implications, that there was no room for debate at the highest level of American law. And that's exactly what happened here. A 9-0 ruling. Every single justice, on a decision that now touches every single state in this country. Now, here's what a lot of people don't realize. Most Supreme Court cases feel abstract. They feel like something happening far away in a courtroom in Washington, D.C. that doesn't really reach into your daily life. But this one is different. This ruling directly affects property rights, government power, individual freedoms, and financial realities for ordinary Americans from Alaska to Florida, from Maine to California. This isn't just for lawyers and politicians. This is for you. So let me take you back to where this all started, because understanding the background is going to make everything else click into place. For decades, we're talking going back more than 100 years in some cases, local and state governments across America have had the ability to do something called regulatory takings, or in some cases outright property seizures and fines. What that means in simple terms is that a government body, could be a city, a county, a state agency, could take action against your property, levy enormous fines against you, restrict your land, or even seize value from you. And in many situations, they could do it without giving you a fair process, without fully compensating you, and without any real accountability. And for a long time, a lot of Americans just accepted that. Either they didn't know they had rights, or they couldn't afford to fight back, or they just assumed the government was allowed to do whatever it wanted. But then came a series of cases, real people, regular Americans, who decided to push back. And eventually, one of those fights made it all the way to the top, all the way to the Supreme Court of the United States. Stay with me, because this is where it gets really important. The case that triggered this ruling involved a situation that honestly sounds like it could happen to anyone. A property owner, an ordinary person, not a corporation, not a billionaire, was hit with government action that stripped away significant value from what they owned. The argument they made was simple. The government cannot take from you, cannot restrict your rights, cannot impose financial penalties without following the proper constitutional rules. And the Constitution, specifically the 5th and 14th Amendments, says very clearly that no person shall be deprived of property without due process of law, and that private property shall not be taken for public use without just compensation. Now let's take a step back for a moment, because I know some people hear the word constitutional, and their eyes glaze over. So let me make this as plain as possible. Imagine you own a piece of land. Could be land you've had in your family for generations. Could be a small business property, could even be your home. Now imagine a local government comes along and says, "We're placing new restrictions on what you can do with that land." Or they fine you tens of thousands of dollars. Or they impose conditions that make your property significantly less valuable. And imagine they do all of this without a real hearing, without fair compensation, and with no real mechanism for you to challenge it effectively. That's exactly the kind of situation this case was about. And the Supreme Court said, unanimously, enough. The ruling established something that legal scholars are calling one of the most powerful expansions of property rights protections in modern American history. Here's what it means in plain English. Governments at all levels, local, county, state, are now on notice that when they take action that significantly burdens your property rights, your financial interests, or your constitutional freedoms, they have to follow a fair and proper process. They have to justify it. They have to compensate appropriately where required. And crucially, and this is the part that's changing everything, you now have a much clearer and much stronger legal path to fight back if they don't. And because this is a Supreme Court ruling, it doesn't just apply in one city or one state. It applies everywhere, all 50 states. Every jurisdiction in this country is now bound by this decision. Here's what a lot of people don't realize about how Supreme Court rulings work. When the highest court in the land hands down a decision, it becomes the law of the land instantly. Every lower court, every state court, every federal court, every local judge has to operate within the framework that the Supreme Court sets. So this ruling didn't just affect the person who brought the case. It reset the rules for every government body and every citizen in America. Now let me tell you why this matters practically, because I don't want this to just sound like a civics lesson. I want you to understand how this could affect your actual life. Let's say you own a small business, and your city has been imposing fees, permit conditions, or zoning restrictions that have been squeezing your ability to operate. Under the old framework, your path to fighting back was murky at best. Courts would often defer to the government. The burden was on you to prove the government was wrong, and that was incredibly hard to do. Under this new ruling, the framework shifts. Governments now bear a much clearer burden to justify their actions, to prove that their restrictions or conditions are proportional and directly related to a legitimate public interest. That is a massive change. Or let's say you're a homeowner, and your county comes in and tells you that because of some new regulation, you can no longer use part of your property the way you planned. Maybe it affects your ability to build an addition. Maybe it restricts what you can do with the land behind your house. Maybe it hits your home's value directly. Before this ruling, many homeowners just had to swallow that. Now you have legal grounds to challenge it, and courts are required to take that challenge seriously. And here's something really important I want to highlight, because this part is getting missed in a lot of the coverage. This ruling doesn't just affect property in the physical sense. The principles it establishes have ripple effects into business licensing, into government permitting, into regulatory fines, and into the way agencies at every level of government can impose financial burdens on ordinary Americans. The constitutional protections the court reaffirmed here are broad, and legal experts across the political spectrum are already saying that the next few years of litigation, meaning the court cases that follow this ruling, are going to reshape American governance in ways we're only beginning to understand. Let me give you a real-world example to make this tangible. Think about small farmers. For years, many states had regulations that allowed agricultural agencies to impose conditions on what farmers could do with their own land, sometimes requiring them to give up access to portions of their property, sometimes restricting how they could use water or resources, often with little or no compensation. The Supreme Court had actually addressed a piece of this in earlier cases, but this new ruling goes further. It closes loopholes that governments had been using to get around the compensation requirements. A farmer in Iowa, a rancher in Texas, a vineyard owner in California, all of them now have stronger footing to say, if you're taking something from me, you owe me fair value, full stop. Now, I want to talk about something else that's unfolding as a result of this decision, and that's the financial implications for state and local governments across the country. Here's what a lot of people don't realize. When the legal rules change, the financial exposure for governments changes too. Before this ruling, city and county governments could impose conditions and restrictions knowing that their legal risk was relatively low. If someone sued, the courts would usually side with the government. That calculus has now shifted. Legal experts are already projecting that we're going to see a wave of lawsuits filed in the wake of this ruling. Property owners, business owners, farmers, developers, all going back and challenging actions that governments took under the old rules. And some of those challenges may result in significant payouts, in settlements, in reversals of government decisions. That matters to you even if you're not a property owner, because government financial exposure eventually affects budgets, affects services, and affects how local governments do business going forward. Stay with me, because I want to make sure you understand what to do with this information. First, if you own property of any kind, a home, land, a commercial space, and you have had a government agency impose conditions, fees, fines, or restrictions on that property in recent years, this ruling may be directly relevant to your situation. You should be consulting with a property rights attorney. Many of them are offering free initial consultations right now, specifically because of this ruling, because they know there are cases to be made. Don't just sit on this. Second, if you're a small business owner and you've dealt with what felt like arbitrary or unfair permitting conditions, licensing restrictions, or government-imposed financial burdens, same advice applies. The legal landscape has changed in your favor. Get informed. Talk to someone who understands how this ruling applies in your state. Third, and this is really important, be very careful about scams. Anytime there's a major legal ruling that gets public attention, bad actors come out of the woodwork. You are going to start seeing ads, emails, phone calls from people claiming they can get you money from the government because of this ruling, or claiming they can file some special legal claim on your behalf for an upfront fee. Do not fall for it. Legitimate attorneys don't ask for large upfront fees before they've even reviewed your case. Legitimate legal advice doesn't come from a cold call or a social media ad. If you need legal help, find a licensed attorney in your state through your state's bar association. That's the safe way to do it. Now let me talk about what's changing in 2026 specifically, because this is the year the real-world impact is going to start showing up in visible ways. Courts across the country are already beginning to apply this ruling in pending cases. Judges who previously would have dismissed property rights challenges are now required to give them full and fair consideration. State legislatures in at least a dozen states are already in discussions about updating their regulatory frameworks to comply with what the Supreme Court has now made clear. Some states are moving faster than others, and honestly, where you live is going to affect how quickly you see the practical changes on the ground. In states that have historically been aggressive with land use regulation, states on both coasts especially, expect significant legal activity in 2026. There are already law firms that have set up dedicated practices specifically to handle the wave of cases they're anticipating. That tells you something about the scale of what's coming. And for future impact, here's the big picture. This ruling is going to be cited in American courts for decades. It joins a line of landmark property rights cases that define the relationship between government power and individual rights in this country. Legal scholars are comparing its long-term significance to some of the most important decisions of the last 50 years. What the court said, at its core, is that the Constitution means what it says, that your rights are real, that the government has limits, and that those limits are enforceable. For ordinary Americans, that message is powerful. It's a reminder that the system, for all its complexity and frustration, still has mechanisms designed to protect you. And when you understand those mechanisms, you can use them. Here's what I want you to walk away from this video understanding. A unanimous Supreme Court decision is rare. A decision that touches all 50 states simultaneously is rare. A ruling that legal experts on both sides of the political aisle are calling historic. That's something you need to pay attention to. This isn't about politics. This isn't about left or right. 9 justices who disagree on almost everything agreed on this. That tells you everything about how significant it is. Don't leave this information on the table. If you have property, know your rights. If you've been hit with government fees, fines, or restrictions that felt unfair, talk to a qualified attorney. Share this video with a neighbor, a family member, a friend who owns a home or a business, because most people still don't know this happened, and not knowing can cost them real money and real rights. Stay informed, stay engaged, and keep watching. Because as this story develops in courtrooms across the country over the next year, I'm going to keep breaking it down for you in plain English, exactly like this.